Leeds, Leeds, Leeds. What is happening? Welcome to Working Hours, a show about a place called Leeds, a time called now, and an activity called work. Working Hours wants to record 1,000 loiners over the course of this, the most important decade in the history of the human species, and ask them about what they do all day and hear how they feel about it. My mission is to try to map out what my city, Leeds, a city that has declared a climate emergency, is doing during humanity's biggest emergency. On Working Hours, we hear how loiners have, are, and will be coping with our multiple crises: the global pandemic, Brexit, and of course, the ongoing and accelerating collapsing of capitalism, the state, and the climate through this decade. To do this, I need people like you, dear listener. Most of all, I need people who are in Leeds or who are from Leeds to come on this show and be my guests. So please join me and help me with this mission whenever and however you can. Critically, I will need people like you, dear listener, as financial backers. Please consider supporting or donating to this project. You can do so with a £1 monthly donation via either Patreon or Ko-fi, or you could donate any one-off amount to Working Hours via either Ko-fi or through the LibrePay button on the About page of Western Studios' website. Thank you. My name is Simon, and this is all my fault. What did you want to be when you grew up?
So a few different things at different times. I have a very clear memory of really wanting to be a dance choreographer. I don't know why a choreographer and not a dancer. It was definitely keen on the choreography. And I didn't do loads of dancing, but I did enough to make me think that I thought that would be a cool job. And then a little bit later, I really wanted to be a fashion designer. And I still have, at my parents' house, a folder full of, I'd printed off a template off the internet, and I've drawn all sorts of outfits on people, and I have a full catalogue of designs that I did, aged probably 13.
Cool.
So that all, and then I think for a long time I really didn't know, but I knew I wanted to do something that kind of had what I felt was a positive impact. And that's still the case, but that's changed shape over the years about what that looks like.
You're listening to Series 3, Episode 30, and to my guest, Anna Bland. This is another Zoom interview recorded on the 17th of August, 2022. Hello, loves. So, Truss is gone, and it was only last week that her getting the job was mentioned on this podcast. This isn't good, and I don't think it's going to improve massively, even after an election. Going through leaders at one every 2 years, as we have after 2015, was not healthy for a state. It's a bad sign. Now, post the awful 2019 election, the average is 1 PM a year now. That's a worse sign. To many, this is a big shock, journalists largely. If you are shocked by it, prepare yourself for the rest of this year, never mind the rest of this decade. If, like me, you would like to try and counter the accelerating collapse of everything, and I think we should all be fighting to save the good bits, then I think you have no choice but to ask others to help you. You don't need to raise an army. You don't need to go online and embarrass yourself. You need to build power in yourself and around you. Isn't that the business of work? A final point here: if you are working in a business where the standards and conditions and behaviours have seemingly fallen through the floor, this is one of the reasons why leadership matters. A fish rots from the head down. If you have a rule-breaking, lying, self-serving bunch of morons as your statespeople, then they're going to broadly encourage that behaviour in the culture. I don't think it's just me or just age that I feel I have seen a noticeable deterioration in the behaviours of some British businesses over the long term. As more of our rights continue to be ripped up, and what are they anyway if they can be ripped up, right? Might makes right, right? The machine will eat up through the lower classes until we are either personally petrified or even totally oblivious by the time they turn up to disappear us. Just keep in mind what happens when societies collapse is all I'm saying. So, spend time with those you love, keep all those you love close to you, physically ideally. Global travel is going to get increasingly more difficult. Be kind to those around you, ease suffering where you can. Anna Bland is team leader for Leeds Sanctuary. Leeds Sanctuary is a city centre project focusing on reflection, wellbeing, activism and creativity. Leeds Sanctuary creates spaces and resources on and offline for people to connect more deeply with themselves, one another and important issues of social justice. They are also exploring craftivism, meditation, mindfulness, climate change, wellbeing, Christian spirituality, and much more, with free resources available on their blog page. Leeds Sanctuary work in partnership with many organisations, including Leeds Church Institute, and share their city centre offices. As a Christian project for people of all faiths and none, they are always looking for new ways of connecting with partners and people, and they have a strong history of Methodism in Leeds City Centre. To find out what is coming up and to sign up to future events and activities, check out their website, www.leedssanctuary.org.uk. Leeds Sanctuary recently released Everyday Sacrament, a book of creative meditations on the pandemic, which can be purchased from their website. You can find Leeds Sanctuary on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Leeds Sanctuary. Now please enjoy this episode of Working Hours with Anna Bland. What is it that you do now then?
So at the moment I am team leader at Leeds Sanctuary, which is a project. We are the Methodist presence, the Methodist Church in Leeds City Centre. But we don't look anything like a church as you would imagine it. So we have no building and we don't meet on a Sunday, but we describe ourselves as a network of communities. So we run various groups and courses and one-offs and drop-ins and all sorts of different things that are all about embracing community in all its forms. And some of the key things that we run, some of those key communities are the Leeds Craftivist group, which is a group of creative activists, which falls under my remit. And we also do some meditation and mindfulness groups, a regular group, but also we incorporate that into a lot of what we do. And then we have a wellbeing arm. So we run courses, days, taster sessions, and that is Sam on the team who runs those. And then we're doing quite a bit of work. We're a city centre project. We have a specific interest in Leeds Dock. So we're doing quite a bit of work on Leeds Dock, building community, gathering people together into different spaces. Yes, so that's a sort of very quick run through of what we do. And I, as team leader, I sort of oversee that, but I started as the development worker. So I came in to sort of see what was possible and what a city centre project might look like in the time that we were in. And I started my job just before the first lockdown. So it was a very, very interesting time to start in a community building role.
Okay, well, I mean, my next question anyway would be, how did you get into it? So, and then I'd probably go into COVID, but maybe we're going to kill two birds with one stone here.
So how I got into it, actually, I did a history degree, and then I've done various jobs in the charity sector, or the charity, the community sort of sector.
Yeah.
And the one that was just before this was I did a community development role over in York. So that really gave me, they gave me some training in that. That really gave me a taste of what it looks like to build communities of people around themes and ideas and interests. And I did some really interesting work in York around that. And I guess saw how transformative it can be to be in community with other people and how many people want that. So I guess that's the kind of basis that I came into this role on. And then I came in and was given such freedom, I suppose, to really think creatively about what were the needs and opportunities in the city centre. And I think I was employed because of my development experience. But then the project's developed from there. And now there's a team of us working on it, which makes a huge difference. It's amazing to have other people alongside you working together for that kind of shared vision.
Okay, so talk us through sort of COVID. did you start there before the lockdown or as we went into lockdown? Because I like to look at the comparison of sort of when people did lock down, whether it was when we were told to or before, or whether they didn't at all, and also look at how it sort of changed our working patterns, what sort of lasting effects it's had. So yeah, tell us your kind of lockdown story, I guess.
So I had been in role for a few months, maybe just over 6 months when lockdown 1 happened. And I had, at that stage, managed to meet a lot of people, build a bit of a vision about who we might be and what we might do. And at that stage, I had run 2 in-person one-off events. That was, and we weren't even called Leeds Sanctuary at that point. That was kind of the extent to which something had started to be built. And so not very much. Although those events had been successful and we'd seen there was I'd seen there was interest in what we were doing. But then when lockdown was called, I was then working from home, and the vision had always was to that point that it would be lots and lots of in-person communities, city centre based communities, and that's what and events, and that's what it would look like. And actually, what it became was everything that I'd envisaged went online. So then the Leeds Craftivist group really grew and blossomed as a Zoom group rather than an in-person crafting group, which worked surprisingly well, better than I sort of anticipated, if I'm being honest. And then we also started some of the mindfulness work online as well. And now, as a result of all of that, I think this is really common. As a team, we all work a bit from home and a bit in the office here. But also, a lot of our communities, we have some online, fully online communities, some hybrid communities, which the Craftivists is now. And then we do some of our work wholly in person. But that is the work that has started since we've been allowed to meet. So that's some of the doc work, which is more recent. That's all been in person. So we're a real mix now as a result of it, I would say, much more than it was ever envisaged, which I think which is good and bad. I mean, I think it's good that we're open to more people because of that working approach. But yes, it does bring its challenges, of course.
Well, I wanted to go back and cover something else there. Oh yeah, so I wanted to look at sort of your workload and your working patterns. I mean, did it, how does it affect your kind of work-life balance and your sort of mental well-being in terms of the amount of work that you were doing and the kind of work that you were doing? Like, is there a noticeable change? Do you feel like you've even kind of processed what happened through lockdown and COVID? Like, yeah, just talk about that, I guess, for a bit.
I love that question. I think it's really good. And I think, so the way it affected my working patterns, the first couple of weeks, I just sat. I mean, we didn't have as with so many other people in our flat, we had nowhere to work. And I just sat in our spare room when we did manage to get a desk, which was good. And I thought, I don't know what my job is anymore, because my whole job up to that point had been going out and meeting people. And I, as I said, just started running some in-person events. I thought, I don't know what I'm doing. So I spent the first period of time working on our website, working on our social media. So kind of getting all of that. And that's when we thought, this won't be for too long. That everyone was saying, a few months, then you'll be out again. But actually, as things went on, I thought, no, we need to do more. We need to create something that will work for this time that we're in.
Yeah.
And the way it's changed, well, my job has changed so much. It's in some ways hard to answer. But I think what I have discovered is some of the work I took on as a result of always being at my desk, I've had to work out how I reassign that or stop doing some of that. Because now that I am back in the office, back going out to meetings, back running events, all of that just takes more time. So a lot of the stuff that I was doing maybe doesn't work like it did, or either needed, or so then I'm finding it a constant sort of reassessment process, really, to work out what that looks like and how my time is used best, I suppose, for the flourishing of the project.
I mean, did it even, because, a lot of those groups and the activist groups, I mean, there was obviously a lot of mutual aid networks going on and a lot of third sector and, local businesses and big businesses that are based locally were kind of throwing in to sort of make things work where they could and set up networks and make connections. I don't know what the question is with this, but like, how much of that has changed your work? Are you working with new groups and working in different ways? I guess the question there is about the sort of wellness message, because that kind of changed. It like got bigger through COVID, and then the way it was thought of sort of changed. So yeah.
That's really good, because I think something I should have said before is that it completely changed. I mean, it's hard to say, because we were such a fledgling project. We didn't really know who we were at that point. But what I saw so clearly and so strongly was such a outcry for community and positive mental health. And that has, I think, dictated so much of the direction of travel for the project. So now the fact that a whole arm of our work is around wellbeing. I mean, who can say, but I wouldn't necessarily have predicted that that's where we would have ended up. And in terms of your question before about how we processed it, I think it's a really interesting one, because so over the lockdowns, a local artist was writing a weekly art meditation on our website, which were well received and really fitted with who we were and the values that we had. And in recent times, we have published that book. That is a book. So we've taken a selection of them and turned them into kind of a print material. And we did a book launch for that. And people shared. So through the book, there are different themes that are really nostalgic to that time. And everyone who I spoke to at the end, so the author and I spoke, and then we had a reflection from a couple of people about their experience of lockdown and how useful the book had been in reflecting on that. And everyone at the end came up to me and said, I haven't thought about what that was like since it happened. I haven't reflected on it. And actually this event and this sharing has brought it all back, all kind of flooding back to me about what an incredibly strange time. And for some people, I think it was a rich time. And for other people, it was a really difficult time, depending on your circumstances. So I think it's a good question, because the only time I have reflected on it is kind of when I've done it professionally, thinking about promoting this book and speaking about this book. I do. I wonder if the fallout is going to be quite long.
Well, and I wonder as well how quickly we're going to be nostalgic about it, because we haven't really had that yet, have we? We haven't had the lockdown nostalgia yet. It'll come probably in the news cycle, because everything's happening so fast. It'll probably be like 6 months' time. Everyone will be like, oh, remember how good it was in lockdown. And then there'll be arguments online about, oh, no, it was awful. No, it was great. But yeah, it was the thing that's incredible was, even if you weren't directly locked down, you can't but notice those changes. Like, if you were a key worker going in, you knew, like, when you went to places that were empty, or you went to places that were incredibly busy because you were working, like trying to support people. You knew, like, it was a complete break from the everyday. Although for a lot of people, I guess it felt the same, just sort of going in, doing the same job when, if you work in a shop or something. But the conditions were different as well. So they had all new regulations and.
Yes. And there were all those signs up in shops saying, please don't harass our staff and things, which was quite shocking, really.
And then change in payment methods, like the amount of places now that won't take cash. And a lot of times that's kind of annoying now because it's like, it's legal tender, take the cash. So I will go from there into, we'll get Brexit out of the way. So since we have Brexited, have you noticed any change in your work, either for better or worse, or no change at all?
I think I find it hard to say in some ways because we were such a new project, and then there was lockdown and Brexit was in the midst of all of that. It's hard to distinguish, I suppose, the impact that it's had. But I suppose working in the sort of space that we do, I think the word that comes to mind for me is that sort of that idea of increased polarization, and that Brexit was all part of that picture, wasn't it? And how, and then we've seen that. I think it's always been the case, but I think it feels very real at the moment. And I guess lockdown and COVID brought that element along with it.
Yeah.
What people's approaches to lockdown? Were you following the rules? What you thought about the rules? Do you know,
anti-vaxxers, vaxxers, maskers, anti-maskers. Yeah, it's sort of like everything's got a cleave. So as a community building organisation, that's not really conducive to your work.
No, and it's interesting, but is part. The question it raises in me as we're speaking is part of what we can do, kind of building bridges between the polarization.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to do, I think, but I think really powerful if you can do it well.
Yeah. Like a mediation work, basically. Yeah. Conflict management.
Yeah.
We'll do climate change. So in your work, what do you do, or what can you do, or are you even bothered about doing anything to mitigate or adapt to or raise awareness about climate change?
So this is massive for us, that massive. So the group of people who make up the craftivist group are, all of us involved are really, I don't even know what to use. Concerned doesn't feel big enough about what the future looks like.
And what the present looks like.
Yes, very true, with this scorching heat we've had. And we have done nearly every action that we have ever undertaken as a campaign group. It has been around climate change. So and sustainability and kind of the things that come under that umbrella. So we've done ethical fashion. How do we have low carbon things with our money? So we did a banking campaign. We've looked at kind of energy sources. We've looked at packaging in supermarkets. So yeah, this area has been huge in terms of my working life and me personally. I'm very concerned about it personally as well. But yeah, it dictated a lot. And I guess in terms of how we work, we have been making choices that reduce our carbon footprint as a team and things like that. Yeah, so it's so really big. And I guess the puzzle piece that we play in it is encouraging creative forms of activism. And within that, within craftivism as a sort of idea and a way of thinking, there's a lot about looking after ourselves as well as making a change in the world, which is partly why I love it so much, to be honest, because it really embraces who we are as whole people and our emotional responses to these big issues. So we've done a bit of work on eco-anxiety, and we always include some meditation and mindfulness. in the craftivism work that we do, because to me, if people are ending up in a place of despondency, guilt and shame around climate change, that is not sort of fertile ground for change making. So we need spaces where people are built up and we can find hope, which can be really hard on this topic sometimes. And building community around that, building a hopeful community has always been really important to me.
Yeah. Out of your list of things of responses to climate change, I would add anger and furiousness, fire. But yeah, we don't need fire. We need less fire. Yeah. Although I've mentioned this before, I think on one of the recordings, but I listened to a podcast a bit ago with this guy who was talking about our relationship to fire, like as people, and how obviously we evolved alongside fire, but we've got, like, day to day, how many of us have no experience of like a flame, like maybe you have a match or a lighter or the hob, but a lot of people will have no experience or contact with fire directly, and like fire's all often concentrated. Yeah, it was fascinating. We're like, oh, I never really thought of that.
Yeah, and then thinking about the destruction that it's causing around the world in wildfires, and seeing the firefighters dealing with that. That's an interesting thing, isn't it? That actually a lot of us are protected from that.
Yeah, from the experience. But I mean, I don't know if you've ever been near, like when I was in Australia, they were having one of the 1,000-year droughts. And it was South Australia I was in, and we were out somewhere, and half the state's on fire, and the sky going orange and stuff, and just soot everywhere. It's quite scary sort of seeing, and you can feel heat for ages. And yeah, I saw photos from someone as well who'd been kind of there was a photo of the car in like all the flames orange behind, and then afterwards just like the amount of ash left on the vehicle. It's madness.
Yeah, very scary.
So I want to go into, before I move into social media and before I move off sort of climate change, we've got to talk about God, and we have to talk about vocation. So with vocation, they're sort of like calling jobs. I've spoken to people who have seen their work as vocational, but I also want you to maybe talk about the rewards of that, of like how well paid it should be or who it should be for. And like, so if I can just get you to speak on the kind of vocational aspects, and then obviously anything that you want to sort of cover there.
Interesting. I definitely would see what I do as vocational, and something that, I mean, it's very sort of Christian language, but sort of being called to something for a certain time. And I think for me it's a lot about skills and interests. And there's this beautiful quote which I'm going to completely massacre, but that says that what we are called to is where our heart and the needs of the world come together at a point. And I suppose that's what I see in my role, that I had a certain developmental skill set, and I was looking around at where there was need and where there was opportunity, and those things coming together in this place. And there's definitely a safe element to it for me in doing this work, and in all the work I've done. I think I guess when you were asking what I wanted to be and that I wanted to have a positive impact, I think right from the beginning there was that influence on how I saw the world and how I saw myself within the world, I suppose. So yeah, I think that I'm passionate about people finding ways where they can use their voice to make change. But I'm also really passionate about people knowing themselves well enough to know how to look after themselves, if that makes sense. And I think that's sort of our take on well-being, because we were quite tentative about using that word because I think it's increasingly layered with meaning, and often that meaning is around you need to spend a lot of money, or it's all become part of the capitalist system. And you read awful things about the net worth of the well-being industry and stuff. So we were quite, and one of our values as an organisation is actually flourishing and not well-being, because I think we feel the word flourishing takes a much wider understanding, a bigger, wider understanding of what it means to be well. That means something more if you say what we want for you is we want you to flourish. So yes, I don't know if that's answered your question.
No, that's
it's where it took me.
Yeah. I was going to move on to UBI next, but I was going to respond to something that you said then, but I've forgotten what it was. So I'll just move on to UBI then. So if there was a universal basic income, how do you think it would affect your work? Would you still do what you are doing now? Would you do it the same way if you were still doing what you do now? And how do you think it would affect the kind of work that you did? Well, I suppose, like, how would it affect your role, you know, for the workload that you were dealing with and the kinds of work you were dealing with?
Yeah, it's interesting you're asking that this week in some ways, because we've just decided that our autumn to winter campaign this year is going to be all around cost of living.
Mm-hmm.
And that feels such a relevant point to that. And what might it mean? That raises questions for me. What might it mean if we did have a universal basic income for this crisis that we are in and entering a worse phase of? Yeah, I mean, I suppose that some of what we do is around inequality, and I'm no expert on universal basic income, but my understanding is that it dreams that to reduce inequality. And I suppose if we saw that, then it would change the shape of our work, because actually maybe people would be in a better position financially and time-wise, and that could mean they could give more to communities. So yes, but I am no expert, and I have. I said to you before we started recording, I was slightly anxious about this question because I've read lots of different opinion pieces on the topic, and I guess personally I feel a bit confused about it. I basically feel positive about it, but I can't quite imagine it. I think is where I'm at.
I suppose maybe asking it another way. I mean, if you were getting your basic needs met, would you take a wage in this position if you didn't have to, if you could do it voluntarily? And then, like, would that mean, if you were doing it voluntarily, do you think you would do less hours, or do you think you would give it less attention, or do you think you would work too much, or how do you think you'd respond to that? It's basically like if you were married to a rich man, or if you had like a posh patron who paid for everything for you. Because it's a vocational role, so you'd definitely be working. You'd definitely do something. You'd want to be doing something.
Oh yeah, I would definitely do something. It'd be interesting. Would it be exactly this? I don't know. But there's a lot of, I suppose, because I was the developmental person, there is a lot of me in the project. So yeah, it's a really interesting. And would I take a wage?
And would it reduce the need for your role in your work as you do it now? Would it reduce the need for that because people did have more time and more available expenditure?
Oh yeah, or would it change it? So actually you were working with people who had more to give. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like developing community might look really different if there were lots of people with lots to give to it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people. Before I started doing this and recording, whenever I'd ask people about UBI, well, whenever I asked people if you didn't have to worry about money, what would you do? The main answers I would get was either go do more education, like go back to school, learn some more stuff, and travel, which again is kind of education. Both of them are sort of extending your experience and kind of enriching your experiences. And work does that sometimes. And I guess, especially in your role, like you were saying, you get a lot out of building that community and meeting people and being sort of that hands-on experience. So, yeah, how would it change our other interactions? It's great to speculate about as well, because, it's great. We don't know. We're not getting it anytime soon. But we have had some experiences of, like, I've had people talk about furlough and how that was kind of, a bit of a UBI, and saying it's great because they had more time and they didn't have to worry so much about money, and, like they saved some money. And I've had people say, compare pensions to sort of UBI and sort of like, well, it's good. I don't have to think about that for getting paid. You can concentrate on work that you want to do and do it at your own pace. I mean, how do you feel about the sort of control you have over your work? Because obviously it's not a 9-to-5 job, but you have to, are you quite disciplined with the hours that you work, or do you just work too much?
Depends who's listening to me. I have a tendency to overwork, but I'm also, because of my personality, I meticulously record what I overwork. So I know exactly how much. So yeah, I do. And that, I guess that is because I'm invested in it personally. Yes, and I have to, because I do quite, as you've said, I do evenings and weekends quite often because of what we do as a project. So that all has to be quite carefully balanced, I think, in this kind of work, because you can easily work so much that then you don't have time to do the things that are your things outside work. And see the people, see your people as well, I suppose. So we within the project, my colleague David and I work really hard on making sure that all of us are booking in our annual leave, are taking our flexi back. We're really keen that because the worry of it is that you can be doing loads of stuff that you're really passionate about, but actually you can still burn out, because you see it all the time, don't you? People burning out from roles like this. And we really, really don't want that to happen, particularly as now we have a wellbeing on. We don't think it would look that good.
We've got a budget for it, but everyone that we've hired is burnt out. So
exactly.
We're going to need a bigger wellbeing department
for all of us.
Well, I mean, one of my themes as I've done this, as I'm going through this, is just, and as a kind of climate solution as well, it's and as a response to COVID, work less. I mean, it's easier said than done, but I think all of us should just work less and like put loads of people out of work. And like idle hands get up to mischief, but as well, people do things, and if they've got the funds to be able to support themselves and they don't have that pressure, then I think they can do more, like they can be more constructive. If you take the pressure off, people can do things like volunteer. You can do more when you've got more energy and you've got more time and you have more control over your time. I think that's from my experience, but yeah, that's kind of the position. I think work less is kind of a good goal socially, because it's just, we're kind of encouraged to go faster, do more, be more efficient. And then all of that efficiency, then as we saw with the lockdown, like it kind of crashed the system because there was no slack. And in terms of resilience, I think it's good to have that kind of, you need reserves of energy and you need to sort of go in and out. So I've talked about before on the podcast sort of working, not quite seasonally, but like how with the sort of 9 to 5, it makes no sense to me to do that into winter, because it's like, it's dark, it's cold, the world's kind of telling you to stay home. It's like, don't do the same amount of hours, do less, do more when it's sort of more seasonal work as well. This kind of breaking down the uniformity of things into like more specifics again, I think we are both seeing, and I think is needed. But yeah, that's my speculative rant over.
And I think what that was bringing up for me was that so much of it is about knowing yourself well enough to know what you need in there. So what you're saying about winter working and what that might look like. And then I'm thinking, but maybe I'm going to work less in summer when it's nice weather, so then I could be out more, and I would work more in winter. Do you know? And I guess it's working out what is knowing yourself well enough to know what is going to work for you and is going to make you happy, I guess, at a very basic level. Yeah, and that isn't always easy because we're so influenced by the society in which we live and the pressures and the expectations of other people that actually, I think a big part of what it means to be well or to be flourishing is to understand what you need in this particular moment, this particular day. And I suppose be within structures, societal employment that allow some level of freedom in that.
More and more of us have to do social media as part of our work, either sort of looking at it or creating it or just dealing with it. How much time do you have to put into social media, and does that time that you invest into social media, does that get rewarded in terms of like your work? Is it benefiting your work, and can you see the benefits of that social media time?
It's quite a funny question for me because there's a board, a group of people. I think they're our management group who look after what we do, and that's who we work with in terms of working out the vision of where we're going and the finances and all that sort of big picture stuff. And when they said that I was allowed to employ someone, that was the role I thought immediately, that's what I want help with. Because I've done some comms in my previous roles, and I liked it. I thought it was good, but it's so time consuming. And I just found so much of my time was taken up with promoting what we do, editing the website to make sure that was right, scheduling our social media, trying to get content for our website. It took up a huge amount of my time. So now I do very little. I guess we have some kind of WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups that are communities of people, and I would spend time in those, but I do very little of the actual posting or marketing elements of Leeds Sanctuary, because I think it's really important, and I think I wanted someone who had passion and time more than I did to do it. Because I do think it's a big part of how you're perceived in the world and how you find people and how people find you. To be part of what you're doing. So that's been hugely valuable, having someone who has a real focus on that.
If you could change any 3 things, so anything at all, it can be as realistic or, fantastical as you want. If you could change any 3 things about your work right now, what would they be?
Oh my goodness, that is a massive question. What would they be? Can you say more time?
Yeah.
That would definitely be one of them. But in like a sort of magical sense, like more time in my life, in my weekly life.
If everyone slowed down, you would have more time.
Maybe. Well, I guess something about greater receptibility in society and understanding of community and the value of that. Maybe I think something like that. Just that sometimes you meet people come and they don't quite get what we do because they don't understand the value of what we do.
Mm.
Not very often, to be fair, but it does happen, and I think that there's that sort of underlying suspicion of other people, maybe, which you can see why there is, but with the news stories and that kind of thing, but that sort of openness to ideas and other people, there was more of that. I think that would be good. And then one more. How big can I go?
As big as you want. Change the world.
I think like something massive about climate change that would have to be in there, because for me it's just the biggest threat, and it's terrifying. And if it was taken seriously at the highest levels of business, politics, everything, then I think that's when we would see real transformations.
I think it's like more and more I'm leaning on it's the peer pressure that's the problem. Like leadership, and we obviously haven't got any examples of good leadership sort of anywhere in the leadership roles, but I mean, this is me on a speculative rant again. But yeah, sort of changing the discourse, I think, is the most important thing. Like the way the media talks about it, and equally how we talk about it. Like the amount of things where I see sort of people talking about the future or a future and not even mentioning it, like just talking about as things stand, if they just stay the same right now, my projections are this for like how, but it's like things are obviously not going to be like that. They're not like that now, and they're going to get less and less like that. So I think as that comes more and more into our language, that's when you sort of see more change. But through this, I know that there's a lot of work going on that you don't hear about. And the other thing I'd say as well is like the appetite for people to sort of, know and be doing stuff and be working on it and not go into work and not make a big impact. Like, I haven't come across anyone who's sort of like, no, I don't believe in it. Yeah, it's which surprises me. Yeah. And what was your second one? Sort of
a greater openness to
I think again with more time, people have more time to kind of digest things. And if we think negatively, everyone's just going to go and watch, some terrible, something terrible like Tiger King. Random example, not to pick on Tiger King if you love it. Yeah. But sometimes you need that downtime. Sometimes you need to just slob around in your pants and watch some rubbish telly. It's just so long as you're not overdoing it, I think.
Yeah. I've just started watching Cheer on Netflix, a docuseries about cheerleaders in America.
Oh, right. Any good? Yeah.
Really good.
Have you binged the whole thing, or are you
not yet?
Messing yourself, right?
If I could, I would.
Like in your kind of role, do you end up just doing sort of, like business training or marketing courses, and then the odd sort of like dealing with people courses? Like, what are the kind of things that you have to do? What are the kind of skill sets that you've had to pick up?
Interesting. So I did community development training, which is like, and then
is that a qualification, or is it just like a training course?
Training course. I can't remember. It's not like a formal qualification. I know that for sure. And then I guess the whole team's done mental health first aid, because that felt really important to who we are and what we do. And then we're doing with that, what do you call it? Where unconscious bias training. We're doing that. I've never done any business training, I have to admit. But I guess I've done a fair bit of sort of comms training in my past, and some leadership training and things like that. So more general, I suppose.
Is it sort of as and when you go into a role and you need that for the role? Yeah. So
Yeah.
I imagine, your days vary. You're mostly either ringing people or sitting with people or going to meet people or writing letters to people to meet people. Or, I mean, how much time do you have to spend on sort of funding and getting funding for projects or finding does any of that do you have to do any of that kind of work?
It's not a huge part of my role because we're very fortunate in being part of the Methodist Church, but we are increasingly, some of our project work, particularly around some of the wellbeing stuff, is potentially opening doors in that area. So yes, that is potentially part of what. Yeah, I mean, it's a part of what I do. It's not a big part though. Yeah, which is good. And day to day, I try very hard with my calendar to find a balance of, because with any job, there's lots of stuff you have to do at a computer, but I really try to find a balance in that. So I am going out and meeting people, whether it's on Zoom like this or whether it's in person in a coffee shop or somewhere else, then I kind of know that's a good place for me to be if I can find that balance in there. Yes, because I prefer being out and about. That's very much my preferred space, but completely see that actually all of that computer-based stuff is a necessary element of what I do. And sometimes if you've been out, I'm an extrovert, so this doesn't happen all that often, but sometimes it is really nice to think, okay, like today I'm having quite an office space day, and sometimes I really like that.
Yeah, it's that sort of get lost in a spreadsheet day. I mean, on the cost of living stuff, are you what kind of support are you having to offer? Is it kind of like going back to supporting in the level of COVID, or is it a different experience, or are you preparing for kind of the worst for winter, or what's the thinking work-wise on that?
It's a good question, actually. I guess we're thinking about it in terms of campaigning and what we can do as a group of campaigners. But I guess one way that we deal with that is nearly everything we offer is free and everything we offer is affordable. And that's always been really, really important. Because I think another thing that I feel strongly about is around the availability of mental health support. Now, we would say that we position ourselves in the preventative space rather than working with people who are currently in a bad place with their mental health. We're not trained to be within that space as a project, but within that preventative space, I think in both spaces we need more affordable options for people, and I guess that's what we're trying to offer in all that we do, really. So cost does not have to be a barrier to being part of anything that we do. Yeah.
But then it has to be, it has to be hyper local, doesn't it? It has to be something, because, transport becomes a cost. So, I mean, what about staffing levels as well? I mean, have you managed to stay sort of fully staffed through COVID, and has it left you with loads of people or positions missing, and do you think that the cost of living could potentially, going into this winter, maybe, are you anticipating that could potentially change any staffing levels so people can't come in, or?
Well, so to be honest, over COVID, mostly in that time it was just me, and actually the team has grown since that time. Yeah, so I think David came in partway through one of the lockdowns. I can't remember. Time is a funny thing with all this, isn't it?
It's collapsed post-COVID. That's my line.
Yeah.
No one can remember. I'm sort of fading the question out as well. I think I'm starting to change the question because I think we've reached the point now where it's kind of, we can't really remember it because we kind of suppressed it. It's like, no, it's over. That never happened. That's done. That's not happening. It's all done. And then now we've, when I ask people about it, it's fuzzy.
Yeah. I think that's what I'd say. So then other people have come on to the team since that time, I guess. So yeah, tricky to answer.
Yeah, because there will be people who, I suppose it becomes a weird question of like, is it more cost effective for me to pay for transport into work to use their heating and electricity, or to stay at home and not pay for that transport and use my heating and electricity, or to stay at home just using the electricity from my computer and not having my heating on? Yeah,
I think there's going to be loads of people who are in really tricky situations like that.
Yeah, I haven't covered sort of, the kind of digital exclusion stuff. When you were through lockdown, and then again with this, in terms of your outreach, do you feel that you're quite good at finding people who need to be reached? And like, is that process quite easy, or is that where the real slog is?
Mixed. different responses to different things that we've tried, because we're still new. Everything that we do in some ways is a trial, and also the whole landscape feels like it's constantly shifting. So some stuff that I thought would be really hard to promote has been dead easy. Some stuff that I thought would be really popular then isn't. And you think, oh, okay, this is all like new information to try and work out where people are at and what people want. And we're doing quite a lot of feedback gathering at the moment over the summer when things are a bit quieter, to try and work out where people are at and what people are interested in and what people want to be part of. And so it's interesting. The digital exclusion thing is really came up a lot, because some people say everything that you for that period when we weren't allowed to meet up, I didn't know what else you could do that wasn't digitally exclusive, because you weren't allowed to see anyone. So I think that's probably why we've sort of become a bit of a hybrid project, although I've never thought of us as that, but this conversation has made me think that it's so that we have an offer. Because then there are people who I've worked with who say, actually, because of my health, my physical or mental health, I find it hard to leave the house. So then you think, so actually it's about thinking about how you can be the most inclusive you can. And I'm not saying that I'm sure we've got a long way to go, but we're trying, I guess. Yeah,
it's that access issue. And also how do I get my service to everyone, and not to everyone, but to the people that need and or want it?
Yeah, I know.
How do you sort of negotiate the kind of, as we sort of spoke at the beginning there, and you sort of like mentioned it being Christian language in part of the interview, how do you sort of deal with the inclusivity, exclusivity of that, of like, dealing with people that are potentially threatened because they're kind of like, I don't want to be involved because it's God or this God, or and then, but also being accessible to as many people as part of your own kind of mission. So how do you deal with that kind of aspect of being open and accessible, but also then I suppose the recruitment side, for want of a better terminology, but the kind of promotion of the church, or like how? Just talk a bit about that.
It's a really good question, and it's something I've thought about an awful, like a lot, so much, because how do you speak about because we are a Christian project open to everyone, and everything that we do is open to everyone, and we're not, and how, but some people will be put off just by the fact that we say that we are Christian based. And yes, I don't, to be honest, we have loads and loads of conversations about it as a team. And okay, how do we word this so we have integrity about who we are, but so we're non-threatening? Because I'm so aware of how threatening that can be to an awful lot of people, and often for very justifiable reasons. So we try. And actually we're doing some focus groups, and some of this is going to be some of the questions that we're asking of, are we getting this right so that people who have a faith think, oh, that's the kind of thing that looks interesting to me, but also people who don't can also think that also looks interesting, and I'm not threatened by the way they're presenting themselves. And you can't get it totally right. That it's impossible to hit that for every single person, but I suppose it's finding the balance and us being true to who we are as well.
Well, I think that's going to be one of those unanswerable questions, isn't it? Irresolvable matters, because it's constantly part of what you're doing and like how you have to do it. Yeah, I don't think you'll ever get a totally satisfactory fixed answer on that of like, this is the way. Okay, so I'm going to throw it over to you here. So if there's anything that you want to promote, or anything that you want to talk about more specifically, or anything I've missed, any social media sort of handles that you want to give out, now is the time for you. So anything that you want to talk about.
Great, thank you. So we're on various social media platforms, and on all of them we are at Leeds Sanctuary, so we're relatively easy to find. We've got a website, which is leedssanctuary.org.uk, and on there you can buy the book that I mentioned earlier about time in lockdown, and that sort of art and a creative, artistic, meditative reflection on that time and particular elements of that.
What's that called again?
It's called Everyday Sacraments. And and I guess also if you go on our events page, we've got communities and we've got events. So if you just if people have been interested by some of the stuff I've been sharing, then there are lots of different ways of plugging in with what we do, whether that's reading a blog. We do some meditation stuff that you can listen to on our website. Or if you want to come and join one of the regular communities or events, or if your organisation wants some wellbeing work, we can kind of, there's all sorts of different things that we do. I'm sure I've missed some, but there's loads of different ways that people can get involved. So
I also want to go back quickly to when we were sort of talking about, again, the sort of level of openness in society. I think as well, sales is a big part of it. A lot of our time is spent drowned in adverts, and when it's not adverts, we are selling to one another. I mean, a lot of our work is selling, or even our work has been turned into sales, like the same way that social media has become very marketing and we have to do more and more of it. I think that it builds connections, but it kind of is an exercise in trust, in that you're building customer bases and you're building that trust relationship with people. But it's also the sort of, I've got to take advantage of you slightly. It's a weird social relationship, I think. So I'm not sure that's particularly healthy for us as creatures.
And do you think that's true in our personal relationships?
But I think it's got to bleed into it. I mean, that's why I want to look at work, largely because, it's how we think of work. And, is work just something that you get paid for? But, people do volunteering work, and then there's plenty of chores and stuff that needs to be done that doesn't get paid for. Child rearing, for example. And also gets paid for by some people, but and then others will say we're not paid enough. But yeah, it's that whole area is the kind of, I want to look at all aspects of work, but I think that whole area is kind of rich for debate and discussion, and I don't really see enough of that, considering that we spend most of our life at work, even within a vocational role. It's not like you're on all the time. You have time that you have to yourself and time that you want and need for yourself as well. Like, you can't be completely selfless all the time. It's that sort of lesson of COVID or the same thing from the aeroplane of fix your own mask first before you try to help anyone else. Because if you're not in a good condition, you can't provide good help and good advice to other people.
Yeah. It's that well-known saying now that you can't pour from an empty cup, isn't it? I hear that a lot in the work that I do. People saying that that's the situation they've been in, and they want to be in a different place.
Thank you again to Anna for being my guest. Thanks again to all my guests, and thanks to you, Leeds, for being my subject. And of course, most of all, thank you to you, my dear listener. First, do what is necessary, then do what is possible. Soon you will find you're doing the impossible. Come back on Monday to hear me talk to Bruce Davies from Basement Arts Project. You can follow this show on Twitter at WorkingHours3 and on Instagram at WorkingHoursPodLeeds. Use the hashtag WorkingHoursPodLeeds to stay up to date on when new episodes are being released, to DM me with your questions, or most importantly, to get in touch if you'd like to be my guest on this show. Please do chuck in anything you can to help the show grow. Go to kofi.com/workinghours and join me there for £1 a month, or you can make a one-off donation of whatever amount. You can also go to patreon.com/workinghourspod to support Working Hours, again from as little as £1 a month. Why not be super awesome and join both? Do something new and something different. Remember to like, share, follow and subscribe to Working Hours. That's me. Cheers ears. Take care out there and be kind to each other, Leeds. Working Hours is produced, recorded, edited and published by Simon Treen for Western Studios Leeds Limited. The music was The Bees from Chopin's Etudes, which is in the public domain and was taken from museopen.org. Please like Western Studios Leeds on Facebook at facebook.com/Western_Studios_Leeds and on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/company/Western-Studios. Leeds, are you considering taking the plunge into podcasts or audio content? Then think Western Studios for support, advice and guidance on getting it made. At Western Studios, you work with a real-life learner who is actually in Leeds. Not a piece of software, not a course of articles or a series of live chats and video courses, but me, a person in physical place-based reality. If you want to work with me to make your podcast or any digital audio content in Leeds, whether it's for your own cause, your publicity campaigns, to promote your products, increase your sales, or just to create your own passion projects, then get in touch with me, Western Studios, now. Don't wade through vapid articles and videos and podcasts about how to make podcasts by disembodied virtual people on the web. Get on with making your podcast now, and then when it gets hard and expensive and it all goes wrong, which it will, then call Western Studios to make your podcast with you or even for you. Western Studios will take on your podcast's boring, time-consuming and painful admin, recording, editing, transcription, whatever. Tell me about your podcasting pain points and I can make it all better for you. I feel your pain. For a charge, I will share it. Remember, podcast work is work. Leeds businesses, Leeds campaigns, Leeds brands. Got an inkling that you'd like a podcast but don't know where to start? Contact Western Studios at makemypodcast@western-studios.com and we'll start making your podcast straight away. The first hour of arranged consultation and pre-production time is free. £25 an hour after that for editing, recording, production. I can also arrange hefty discounts for the right project. So tell me your idea and your budget and I'll tell you what I can do for you. What do you have to lose? Time, that's what. Time is running out. The best time to make a podcast was 10 years ago. The second best time is right now. Writers in Yorkshire, what are you doing with your lives? Hopefully you're writing. Well, I know there are listeners out there who want to hear great original writing performed as audio content that is about and for and has been made in Leeds. How do I know this? Because I'm one of them loiners what wants it. Help me make your old screenplays, unpublished novels, unperformed plays, stories, poems, and performances, whatever you got, baby, and make it as podcast content. Is your work arty, salacious, pulpy, strange? Good. Is it unfinished? Good. I can help you with that too. I can work with you to find actors, musicians, and voiceover artists and quickly realise your projects. I get practice making the shows and you get a finished, performed and published version of your writing. Save yourself the hassle and the headache of making your podcasts on your own by working with me instead.